we'll get on with our main program for the day, and I'll invite up Dr. Steve to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon, everyone here and on Zoom. We are very honored today to have someone in this community that's highly regarded and respected. It is Rabbi Ron Muroff. And Rabbi Ron was born and raised in Canada, okay? And came to the United States and studied at Columbia University and then at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He is in his 29th year as the rabbi of his congregation in uptown Harrisburg, which is Chisda Amuna. Thank you, Rabbi. And it means strengthen faith. Throughout his tenure, he has been involved in interfaith work throughout our community, and many of you who know him know his engagement. He has visited Israel 18 times, and including a year as a college student, and he has 4 children, and 3 of them live in Israel. Rabbi Muroff is the co-editor of The Fire Within Us, a collection of personal reflections on Jewish teachings that inspire and animate our lives. The mother of his children is also an individual who had the wisdom to attend HAC. We always try to get that HAC plug in. So with that, please, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a very warm Rotary welcome to our own.
Thank you so much. It's really good to see you. And I've never been to a Rotary meeting before, not even online. And I've heard of Rotary for a long time, and I know some of you personally, and I'm really honored to be with you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts and feelings about an important topic. And I'm also interested to hear your thoughts and your questions and suggestions. I was asked to speak about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The first thing I want to note is that there will be no PowerPoint demonstration today. If I were a political scientist, perhaps I would have created a series of slides with maps of Israel and Palestine, the past and current borders. If I were an historian, I might have brought you a PowerPoint with a list of dates identifying key events in the conflict. And if I were a certain kind of religious leader, maybe I would have created a presentation with biblical quotes demonstrating to you why the Jewish people have an exclusive claim on the Holy Land. And if I were a different kind of religious leader, I might have brought a different list of verses from the Quran demonstrating how the land belongs exclusively to Muslims. But I'm neither an historian or a political scientist, and I'm not a religious leader who believes that truth belongs exclusively with one group or another. In these few minutes, I'd like to offer some general approaches to the conflict and some thoughts about what we as Americans can learn from this faraway clash and ways that we can contribute to helping both Israelis and Palestinians. First, there is not a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I'll say that again. There's not a Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Rather, there is a myriad of Palestinian-Israeli conflicts. We use the terms Palestinian and Israeli often as if they were monolithic entities, but the truth is that each side is composed of various groups, each of which has its own approach and its own agenda. Among the Palestinians, the overwhelming majority are Muslim, mostly Sunni. There's also a significant but declining number of Christians. Some Palestinians, as you know, are affiliated with Hamas, a group that rules Gaza, that's affiliated with Iran, a harsh Islamist group that recently congratulated the Taliban in its defeat of the United States. It is explicitly dedicated to Israel's destruction and imposing their will on the population under its control. Others are affiliated with the Palestinian Authority, which is headquartered in the West Bank. Some are more religiously observant, some are more secular. Some are more politically extremist and violent, others are more pragmatic. Conflicts among Palestinian groups impact their relationships as a group with Israel. And among Israeli Jews, it's important to note that, and this sometimes surprises members of my congregation, that not all Israeli Jews are religious. In fact, it's only a minority of the population. And among the religious, if that weren't enough of a schism, there are many, many groups of religious. Among the ultra-Orthodox, They're anti-Zionists. They oppose the creation of a Jewish state. They believe that it was premature, that it should have waited for God to do it himself as opposed to acted upon by man. And among the modern religious, there are essentially two camps. One is what I might call the Messianists, who believe that the victory of the 1967 war that Jews call the Six-Day War is a sign that God intends for the Jewish people to resume its national life in the entirety of the biblical Holy Land, and that it is a grave sin to abandon any of it. So that's one group of modern religious Jews. And another, which I might call the covenantal camp, see Israel as a quote, return to history for the Jewish people after thousands of years of living in diaspora, often under persecution, crusades, the Holocaust massacre, the Holocaust, living under Stalin and his successor, the Soviet Union, among many others. And so returning to Israel then is an opportunity and challenge for us to live Jewish values in every aspect of life, including in our interactions with Palestinians and other minorities, which means that such Jews are open to compromise over the territory of the land of Israel. And I would add that since the collapse of the Oslo negotiations and the Second Intifada, there's great skepticism that compromise is even possible. And if that were confusing enough, among Jews, there are also secular Jews. And there are at least two kinds. There are right-wing nationalists and left-wing, I call them humanists. And among Israelis, there are also 15% of the population who are Arabs, Palestinian Arabs. Interestingly, most of them, according to polls, would prefer to remain in the Jewish state. I must have said something controversial about the microphone here. Rather than become part of a Palestinian state in some possible two-state solution. And once again, the conflicts among Jews often spill over and impact the conflict between Israel and Palestine. So number two, if you're counting my major points, number two is that simplistic conceptions about the conflict are by definition incomplete and sometimes outright false, and they help to perpetuate the conflict. Believing that Israel is, for example, some say, an illegitimate colonial state that was established to further Western interests in the Middle East. Or sometimes you hear people say, all or most Palestinians are terrorists and Israel has no choice but to suppress them in order to protect its citizens. I argue very strongly that these kinds of simplistic conceptions allow Israelis and Palestinians and their supporters to dehumanize the other. So when people call for boycotts of Israel, for example, it only serves to fuel Israeli Jews' sense of isolation and confirms their fears of anti-Semitism. Depicting Palestinians as terrorists only fuels their sense of anguish and leads them to extremism because they are led to think that no matter what they do, their suffering will never be seen or addressed adequately. Bottom line, if you really believe that you are facing an existential threat from the other side, then your only goal is to destroy the other. I'm not wearing a watch, so please give me a heads up in a couple minutes. But here's the thing. Both Jews and Arabs have a claim to the Holy Land, and neither one is going anywhere. So even if people on each side cannot accept the narratives of the other, steps can be taken to recognize their humanity, and that recognition itself transforms the conflict. Given the history of bloodshed, pain, and suffering on all sides, this call to see each other's humanity as both a moral and pragmatic approach to the conflict may seem delusional or misguided, but there are, friends, courageous Israelis and Palestinians who are doing just that. I would now like to read a few excerpts from an interview with an Israeli and Palestinian that illustrates the possibility and transformational power of encountering the other. I begin by quoting the interviewer, Krista Tippett. The friendship between Rabbi Damelin and Ali Abu Awad is an Israeli-Palestinian story that rarely gets told. Rabbi's beloved son, David, was killed by a Palestinian sniper. Ali's beloved brother, Yusuf, was killed by an Israeli soldier at a checkpoint. These terrible losses led them to each other and to a universe of others on both sides of that border, which a network called the Paris Circle, Bereaved Families Forum. This citizen-led movement breaks the narrative of Israeli and Palestinian violence. So first I'd like to share an extended quote from the Palestinian in this interview, Mr. Ali Abu Awad. And I'm quoting him directly, so I hope that's clear. I started discovering many things. I guess what I'm trying to say is I recognize that English is not this man's native tongue. I I start discovering many things. I start discovering the fear of the other side. And the life doesn't become better, but it becomes possible. When I heard about the bereaved families, when that religious guy, Yitzhak Benkenthal, which his son has been kidnapped and killed, and when I heard that they want to come to us and talk to us, I surprised, I shocked, you know. How come somebody who lost somebody in the conflict will be able to sit with their enemy? We invite them. They came to our home, and it was the first time that I saw an Israeli crying. I used to see soldiers. I used to see settlers. I used to have this very bad relation by treating me in a very bad behavior, but I never saw the tears of the other side. I never saw the pain of the other side. And they are the strong side. I mean, why they care? I mean, they come stay home, they could stay home and don't care because they have their army, their government, their economy, everything. So why? And they start telling that if we can use this pain in a human way together, maybe we can protect the other people, and maybe we can lead our both nation through nonviolence. And I realize that by joining the forum, the pain does not disappear. So if I'm reacting by violence, I'm giving the occupation the excuse and the reason to make the law more high, and to put more checkpoint and to be right by killing us. So I decide, and my mother and my family, everybody, to be involved and to join the parent circle. And today I feel that I start discovering many things. I start discovering the fear of the other side. I start realizing why we don't want to recognize each other, because we are afraid, because we cannot deal with daily suffer, because the Jewish cannot deal with the history of the Holocaust and so on. So because the Palestinian cannot deal with the daily occupation life. And the life doesn't become better, but it became possible. I understood right away that the biggest problem we have as two nations is that we don't know each other. All we know is the stigma created by the media. And now an excerpt from the Israeli Institute, this Rabbi Ron. That's really the basis of all the work that we are doing. It's to take away the whole stigma, to take away the demonization, which is fed eagerly by all the media around us who feed off extremes. You know, it's much more sexy to have an extremist screaming at the top of a mountain about a greater Israel, or to have the mother of a suicide bomber saying she's proud of her child. But I can tell you that all of these mothers who've lost children, I don't care what they say to the media. I know what happens to them at night when they go to bed. We all share the same thing. Well, I can give any kind of clarity about what we're doing and why we do that. The personal narrative of human beings is the way to create empathy on the other side. We keep talking to groups who have dialogue. So the fact that I can tell you my personal narrative and that Ali can tell you his personal narrative will open up a new vista of history for you, because you'll understand why Ali's family are living where they live, where they came from, and the pain that the family have experienced, and the pain of the Palestinians. And through that, instead of reading a history book, you'll understand the pain of the Palestinians. And if I tell you about Yaakov Guterman, in our group, an Israeli who was a Holocaust survivor for Auschwitz, who came to Israel with no family at all as a small child, having lost everybody and finding a new life in in Israel, and marrying and having a son who was killed, and still being able to join our group and be part of this search for reconciliation and stop the violence, stop the killing. So why should Americans, my voice again, why should members of the Rotary Club care about what is going on in Israel and Palestine? Of course, there are geopolitical considerations. It would be terrible, beyond terrible, if ever Hamas and other terrorist groups were to prevail over Israel and establish another extremist Islamist country subjugating women and promoting terror. Yet in addition to these concerns, we Americans have a lot to learn from initiatives that break down stigmas and stereotypes. Over there, it's helping Arabs and Jews to see each other as fellow human beings. And it seems to me we can do some of that work right here, maybe right here in this room. The recent agreements between Israel and Arab Gulf states demonstrate that common interests can transcend historic differences. Did you know that within weeks of the recognition between Israel and the UAE, tens of thousands of Israelis had visited Dubai and Abu Dhabi? And those Israelis were warmly received. My own son was among those visitors. Israelis and Arabs can relate to each other as fellow human beings and let go of the stories that have been promulgated about the other on both sides. In some ways, sadly, it is easier for Israeli leaders to speak with leaders in the United Arab Emirates than with Palestinian leaders. That's why grassroots efforts like the Parent Circle, the organization that brings together bereaved parents like Ali and Rabbi, are so important. I encourage you to learn more about the organization by visiting their website, theparentcircle.org. And I also want to highlight another effort to recognize their shared humanity, Hand in Hand, a network of schools that educate Jewish and Arab children in the same classrooms. That may not sound shocking to you, but please know that until recently, Arab and Jewish children would never have gone to school together. So these hand-in-hand schools are changing the lives both of the children who attend them and their families, because they're getting to know each other as people and not just as people. In May, when there were violent clashes between Arab and Jewish citizens of Israel, and when Hamas fired rockets indiscriminately into Israeli towns and cities, and Israel responded by firing missiles in Gaza against Hamas, which tragically also led to the deaths of civilians. An op-ed was written in an Israeli newspaper by Zohar Michalberg, an organizer of a hand-in-hand kindergarten classroom in Rosh Ayin, a Jewish town in Kfar Qasim, Palestine. Here is her final paragraph. The round of war and unrest has brought on terrible violence, especially in mixed cities and regions. It also brought home the understanding that the peaceful majority must work together now. Even under the threat of rockets, even in the face of mass rage, some people call us delusional, and they might be right. It may be delusional to raise children in a shared environment while our people are killing each other, but we have no choice but to continue on this path and encourage more families to join our wonderful delusional world of integrated education. As we grow, so too will the partnership between the two cities and the entire region. Try as some might to destroy our work, we will continue building our home, brick by brick, like kids do. You can find more information about Hand in Hand at handinhandk12.org. Two final thoughts. The truth matters. When Palestinians deny the Holocaust and the history of Jews in the Holy Land, and every week there are more coins being discovered demonstrating the reality of Jewish roots in that land, it leads some Jews to conclude that there is no partner for any kind of negotiation or compromise. And in turn, when Israelis deny Palestinian experience of suffering, whether from 1948 or today, or all the years between then and now, it makes Palestinians perceive Israelis as heartless oppressors. Yet it is possible, as the Parent Circle and Hand in Hand make clear, for people firmly rooted in different peoples, for people firmly rooted in different stories to recognize each other's humanity, and at least in some cases, actually become friends. The second, my final point, religion can be a force for division and conflict, and religion can also be a force for progress and coexistence. Extremists on all sides get the most attention, yet quietly there are religious leaders working to deepen understanding and advance peace and crisis mitigation. And for those interested in this work, one last website I recommend to you, religiouspeaceinitiative.org. When I accepted this invitation, I told you, Steve, that I would aim to give an overview of some different and competing narratives and offer some thoughts about why people in central Pennsylvania should care about what is going on over there, and not just dismiss everyone upon both their houses, or one side as opposed to the other. I tried to do that this afternoon, and also share with you some thoughts about how the experience in the conflict there bears on the conflicts and outcomes. I thank you for your time and attention, and I hope that there's still a few minutes for some questions and comments from those of you who assembled. Thank you very much.
For some questions for Rabbi Muroff.
I don't know your name. Can you just say your name?
Walter David Prager.
Walter, if you don't mind, if I could just remember your first name. Walter, go ahead.
They also call me Dave.
I'm just going to call you Sir in the blue shirt. Go ahead.
Sir, but the thing I wanted to ask about, I just got a call about a month ago. And from a lady from Jerusalem, named Gail. You ever had to deal with her?
No.
She just had that.
Okay. I'm familiar with Rabbi Epstein, so I guess it's
That's daughter.
So I don't know if it's a question yet. I don't know how it works here, but I know among Jewish audiences when somebody asks for questions, usually it's preceded by a few moments of introduction. So far, Walter is referencing a phone conversation he had with a woman in Alex who works for an organization of Christians and Jews for Israel, something like that.
Anyway, she was telling me how in the last several months they used as a benefactor. And they used that money to build bomb shelters for these Holocaust Jews and everything that 80s and 90s. And it's become very interesting. Wonderful mission.
Yes, so I don't know if it was a question, but the comment is that this organization is helping build bomb shelters for Israeli Jews, including Holocaust survivors. I mentioned in my introduction to Steve, thank you for reading, the part about HAC was not in the original introduction, and I'm glad you added that. Because of Leah's HAC affiliation, you get to bank at the SVCU, so that's good. Another benefit of HAC. You know, this is very personal. I have 3 kids, 1 son-in-law, whom I love very much, and 4 grandchildren. And, you know, my younger daughter serves in the IDF. She's a soldier, a lone soldier. Her home kibbutz is on the Gaza border. So when Hamas decides that they're not getting enough attention, and they launch bombs towards Israel, often they're launching missiles and balloons towards my daughter's kibbutz. And she has spent much time in bomb shelters. It's very personal, and I want to emphasize, and I understand that there are Palestinians who are living in fear of Israeli incursions in their neighborhoods and communities too. Another comment or question? Yes.
I'm really glad you mentioned the parents' circles and hand in hand. I would like to add that Rotary groups in Israel and in Palestine would be a great force for promoting reconciliation.
Amen. I'm just learning about Rotary today. I mean, I've known Ted Lawyer for a while. I know Peggy. I don't want to go around the room. You know, I know you and you, but not too many of you. And you know, Rotary has always been something I've heard about. But you know, Rotary is about service, from what I understand. And I think it's important for Americans who want to help not to think that we're going to come in and help these poor people who are at odds. We have a lot to learn. And I think that the helping goes both ways. Anybody from this side of the room? Anybody on screen? Hi, Connie. I miss you, Miguel. I don't know if it's allowed for the speaker to finish early, but I'm going to take that risk. I want to read a poem, if I may. I don't know how often poetry is read here in Rotary, but this is a favorite poem of mine by the late great Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. The poem is entitled Tourists. And I'll just read. Visits of condolence is all we get from them. They squat at the Holocaust Memorial, they put on grave faces at the Wailing Wall, and they laugh behind heavy curtains in their hotels. They have their pictures taken together with our famous dead at Rachel's tomb and Herzl's tomb and on Ammunition Hill. They weep over our sweet boys and lust after our tough girls and hang up their underwear to dry quickly in cool blue bathrooms. Once I sat on the steps by a gate at David's Tower. I placed my 2 heavy baskets at my side. A group of tourists was standing around their guide and I became their target marker. You see that man with the baskets? Just right of his head, there's an arch from the Roman period. Just right of his head. But he's moving, I said to myself. Redemption will come only if the guide tells them, you see that arch from the Roman period? It's not important. But next to it, left and down a bit, there sits a man who bought fruit and vegetables for his family. That image from this poet, whom I had the privilege of meeting and hearing him read poetry, of refocusing our attention. I'm a student of history. I've had a chance to walk the Holy Land 18 times at least. But sometimes that history can suffocate a life on both sides. And if we can only see that man, and the poet doesn't say whether it's a Jewish man or a Palestinian man or a Christian or what. This Muslim doesn't say. But if we can start seeing each other with those baskets, with the worries of trying to raise kids and just get along. I think there's some hope, and if Rotary can be a partner, I just say as a father of Israelis, as a Jew who forgives anything this way, does not apologize for claiming a stake in the land of Israel. It's our historical homeland, and Jews should not have to apologize for, especially given the history of the 20th century, to apologize for a claim to that land. But neither should returning to history give us Jews and supporters of Israel the right to deny the history, deny the attachment, deny the claims of another people. And the future will tell whether we're able to actually help people communicate across divides of religion and ethnicity and political affiliation, both there and here. May God bless the work of our hands, and may God bless the work that Rotary does day in and day out. God bless you. Thank you.